I'm in Western Massachusetts, and it's a beautiful fall morning here, and the trees are just exquisite. They're stunning. All the colors of the golds and the oranges and the yellows. It just opens up my heart.
Mm.
So I was thinking this morning actually about this group because many of you know I've been supporting and creating a women's empowerment group for Afghan women with the University of Massachusetts and also Catholic Charities. And we meet weekly to do our planning, and the executive director of Catholic Charities for this area has been participating. And we usually start each meeting like just checking in. And I realized that we become a support for her because when she shares about her week, it's not only supporting the Afghans, but this week there's 10 families Haitian families that arrived. And they just came from Boston because one of the governors transported all these refugees to Boston. Now they have to find homes and support for them. And then now the Ukrainians have arrived, and she's trying to find homes for them. And some of them were living in, emergency rooms because there was no housing for them. So I just realized that our little group here, with Catholic Charities and University of Mass and our organization focusing initiatives, that we bring something really special to this meeting each week is we just listen to her. And she's usually the first one that comes every week because she knows that she's getting something for herself. And I think it gives her the support that she needs to go out and do what she does. So, when we talk about help for helpers, you can see instances of it happening without even knowing all the details about focusing, just our presence and being with them and with what is. So it's been really exciting to see it happen in action. And when we talk about focusing in action, it was just pausing and being and listening. It's just been really exciting. So I just wanted to share that this morning. Also, I'm really grateful for Serge to be with us. When we talk about presence, his presence always is quite, I don't know how the word for it, but it really resonates and opens up my heart too. So good morning, and good morning, Serge. And I know Lynn probably wants to say a hello.
Good morning, everybody.
And I want to welcome you also on this fall morning. And I'm thrilled to have Serge here with us. And how would I introduce Serge? Well, I think of Serge as one of those people who is doing very important work in crossing focusing and meditation, focusing and mindfulness. And these two, what Jean would call neighbors, joining together makes, an amazing, wonderful, many different kinds of practices. And Serge is going to introduce us to the approach that he's working on and has worked on for many, many, many years, right, Serge?
Yeah.
Serge is a focusing-oriented therapist and guide, and has done many, many different kinds of group kinds of processes. But I think of you, Serge, as a wonderful beach person, because we went to Costa Rica on a focusing kind of retreat, and I still have these wonderful images of Serge in his bathing suit with the ocean and just being so at home in the sea, and that's a wonderful image for me. Sometimes those pictures come up from, how they make them, Google makes them for you or something, these memories, and I see Serge there with the ocean.
Right.
So welcome, Serge.
Thank you, Lynn. Thanks, Melinda. Thanks, everybody. It feels great to be part of this group and the energy of this group. So what I want to be sharing with you today is the DNA of what I'm interested in my approach to focusing, mindfulness, as Lynn described, that crossing of focusing, mindfulness, meditation. And I call this active pause. And of course, anybody who is a focuser is steeped in how meaningful the pause is. And it all starts with a pause. That's what essentially Gendlin discovered when he was paying attention to what eventually led to focusing on the map, was the ability of people to pause, was the predictor of the ability to make changes. So, it's there. But, I want to my general finding is that the pause is not just something that exists in focusing, but is essentially the starting point for meditation. Meditation is some kind of an extended pause, and meditation and mindfulness in general have to do with a pause. So how is that? And I want to go not in terms of general ideas, but in terms of how is it steeped in the way we human beings function. And that's why the text, the title of this discussion is about neuroscience. And neuroscience and relational mindfulness. So now why qualify it as relational mindfulness as opposed to just mindfulness? I think if you ask people in the street, what comes to mind when they hear the word mindfulness, it would be they imagine somebody sitting either cross-legged or on a chair and essentially sitting still and doing nothing. So the concept is one person isolated, and so it leads to a whole sense of mindfulness as an individual endeavor and something that in some way you strive to do, which is, in some ways, it might be a way in which you can conceive of this practice, but is not the way that mindfulness evolved. And if you look at evolution, evolution is essentially something that is about adapting. And adapting is that any living creature, any living thing, now or ever, has always lived in interaction. So you cannot even imagine of something without interaction. So that is, of course, at the core of Buddhist philosophy, but is also at the core of Jin Gendlin's approach, which is essentially, if you think about life is interaction, and you don't have isolated units, but you have everything is in process. So both from, say, spiritual perspective, which is the perspective, for instance, that Buddhists have had on the world, but also from the philosophical and practical perspective of Jin Gendlin, life is interaction. And where neuroscience and evolutionary psychology come into play is they talk a little bit more about how this came to be and how this in practice affects things. So if you're a focuser, you're familiar with phrases like carrying forward. It's such a big phrase that it's become the slogan of the Focusing Institute, and that sense of life carrying forward. And we're so accustomed to it, and we speak about it, so that it's a phrase that in a way has its own meaning. But the question is, how does it come about? How come, life has that quality of carrying forward, and how is it embodied? And so if you look at the context of evolution, then you have a little bit more of an idea of how it came about. And so I want to maybe jump into a story, and a story that's told by Ian Mcgilchrist. So Ian Mcgilchrist is he's a psychiatrist who's very interested in neuroscience and has been focusing on neuroscience for decades. He's also an exceptional human being who started his life doing a doctorate in English literature. Once he started teaching it, said, you know, there's got to be a way to go deeper. And in going deeper, decided that that's where he needed to essentially learn more about psychiatry. And he began a training in psychiatry, became a psychiatrist and a neuroscientist. And so wrote a book he called The Master and Its Emissary, which is about the two modes of the brain. And so the story he tells is, take a look at a pigeon. You know, and if you see a pigeon, usually you'll see them very absorbed, trying to pick up grain. So, you know, just picture that mental image of, you know, the pigeon is on the ground, and there is its head bobbing, bum, 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 you know, so very, very focused attention, okay? Because it really wants to find any grain that is available on the ground, and it wants to be very careful to not accidentally get a stone instead of a grain. So, you know, fear of missing out, not losing any grain, and fear of getting something else than a grain. And, you know, you have that really hyper-focused perspective of the pigeon. And so you look at that and you say, wow, isn't it wonderful? This is what evolution did. Evolution created this capacity for really focused attention. But then you think, well, if, you know, all that the pigeon did was have that super focused attention, imagine what happens when you have a bird of prey circling around. Okay? And the pigeon is so preoccupied by finding the right grain that there is no way they even notice the bird of prey. And so the bird of prey would eat the pigeon, and basically, evolutionarily, you know, that's kind of a dead end for the line of pigeons. Okay? So they survive to this day because actually, even though they're super focused, there is something else that's functioning to have that peripheral attention. And so what this says is that when we talk about attention, we think of it as one kind of attention. For instance, you know, if you try to go beyond the standard cliche about mindfulness, mindfulness is same as meditation, you would say mindfulness is paying attention, you know? But if you look at the way in which animals and human beings pay attention, you would say there really are two kinds of attention. So let's dig a little deeper. And you know, first, you know, I'm talking about pigeons, but so how does this apply to human beings? Well, again, imagine our ancestors, you know, in the wild, picking up berries. Okay, so they're really focused. You know, it's not like they're really into not just paying attention to the trees as opposed to the forest, but they're paying attention to individual berries. Okay, it's very, very focused attention. And again, they survived. So it means that they were able to have that broader attention so that they wouldn't be caught by predators. Okay. So very important to see the difference between focused attention and that broader attention to the surroundings. Okay? One word for it is situational awareness. And that's also what I call relational mindfulness. So relational mindfulness has that situational awareness, but also that capacity to focus, to be in a more focused way, and to shift from the situational awareness to the more focused attention in the service of relationality. Okay? So you see, just taking a moment, pausing, absorbing it, of how what we're talking about is Lynn meets Mcgilchrist. Philosophy meets neuroscience. Okay? So we're not talking about abstract notions. We're really are into a whole concept of what we do is embodied, and a curiosity about what is it in the body, in the way the body functions that makes it possible. Okay? So now back to focusing. And if you keep in mind that notion of the two kinds of attention, what is focusing? So a big thing I do when I teach focusing is to start to say, if you remember one thing about it, it would be unfocusing. That what we do in focusing is we break the pattern of thinking we know, or of assuming we know, and having a firm grasp of things. I know what a pen is, and I know it. It's like the same thing as grasping it. This is it. Focusing starts with thinking, I'm not going to assume that I know. Wait a minute. What is happening? And that's the unfocusing. And it is the unfocusing that makes it possible to reorient and then refocus and have a different focus. So I want to give you some kind of an image for it that is not really part of very high culture or of scientific culture. I will be quoting cartoons. And I don't know if all of you know the Roadrunner cartoons with Wile E. Coyote. So the Roadrunner is that little animal the cartoons takes place in the desert of Arizona. And you have all of these high mesa, and so you have the Roadrunner is that bird that runs really fast. Beep, 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 beep comes up. And Coyote is the villain, the animal that is constantly focused on eating the birds, capturing the bird and eating the bird. And the ongoing gag is that the coyote runs, and so you have here, you imagine this is the high mesa, and the coyote run, and at some point is so caught up, so focused on running, he doesn't notice that he's no longer on the mesa. He's gone into the empty air, and he continues running because he's so focused that he doesn't even notice. So he's continuing. And then at some point, he notices it, is startled, and then looks around and up and down, and then plump, falls down. Okay? So why do I mention it? Because I think this is essentially the DNA of active pause, of how we shift into mindfulness. What it takes is you have stage one, which is stopping, pausing, being surprised. So in the case of the cartoon, it's an involuntary pause. You just, at some point you sense that your feet are no longer on the ground. So, something forces you to pay attention. In focusing or in mindfulness, what we do is we consciously prompt ourselves to say, wait a minute, let me pause a little bit. Okay. Then what happens in the cartoon image is that the bird is like, the coyote is like looking around, looking up, down. So that's a reorienting. Okay. You have lost ground. You're no longer on firm ground. You have to figure out where you are. Okay. And so that is the equivalent of the situational awareness. The bird who had been eating grain sensed that there is something happening. And so they kind of need to orient to say, where is it coming from? Is it simply that, that they had been sensing that there is a cloud in the sky, that's what made a shadow and there's no danger? Or is there a bird of prey or some other danger coming? And where is it coming from? Okay. So that's the reaction of orienting. And that's what you do. And then once you realize where you are, you do what it takes to face the situation. So in the case of the bird flies away if need be. In the case of Wile E. Coyote, once he realizes there's no more ground, falls down. Okay? So that is kind of what we do in any mindfulness practice. And what is interesting is it is really not something that came from a comic strip, but it is something that comes from our physiology and evolution. And this is essentially what people who study animals call the threat response. Okay, and this is exactly why it happens that way for Wile E. Coyote. It's just a cartoon version of something that is what animals do and human beings do. So if there is a danger, there is an awareness, thanks to that situational awareness that I described, something's happening. Then there is the orienting, again, figuring out what to do, and then doing it. Okay? And so in mindful awareness, in focusing, what happens is you have that pause, you have that reorienting, and then new direction. So another example I used, another image, so that it's not just relying on a cartoon, but something, many images sometimes speak to different people or speak to us in different ways, is to think about a GPS. So if you think about, you're in your car, you're driving, the GPS indicates the route, you follow it pretty much mindlessly because you know where to go, you just follow, you keep following direction. And suddenly, there's a turn, you took the wrong turn. So what happens with the GPS, whoa, something needs to recompute. Then it starts recomputing, okay, which is essentially the reorienting. When the GPS tells you recalculating route, it means it is trying to figure out where it is and how to go where you want to go. So that's the reorienting. And then comes the road that you can follow, okay? And so same thing in terms of mindfulness, you have those 3 stages. In focusing, I can also just limit focusing to these 3 stages, okay? Pause, recompute, reorient, and then some kind of insight. You could also think of it as focusing as having 2 series of these movements. So in the first one, you pause with the intention of paying attention to your body. And so you reorient, and you feel something in your body. And so, yeah, that's something in my stomach that's kind of churning, okay? And you have that felt sense. And then you say, okay, I'm not going to stay with just the felt sense itself. You pause. And what is that felt sense? And you leave it some room. And it reorients. And then something emerges, and it's a handle. Okay? And then you can do little cycles, because then it becomes, oh, yeah, this handle, is it meaningful for me? Okay, so that pause, that reorienting, and then again, something emerges. Okay, so in other words, that 3-phase cycle, I think of as the DNA of how we orient, how we relate to the world we live in. And so, if you think about it, what's happening is it gives you a physiological basis for understanding what it means that life is interaction, and that the felt sense is carrying forward. Because essentially, the process of life is to be present, assess the situation, and respond to it. And in modern life, we don't really need much of the time to have that kind of attention open to function. Okay? If you think about it, when our early ancestors were in the wild and they were, say, picking berries, they needed to be aware, because if they were not paying attention, they would not get berries, or if they were not paying attention, they would be eaten by some kind of a predator. If you walk in the woods these days, there is a path, there's all kinds of markers on the trees, there's no wolves, you're not looking for berries to eat. So basically, personally, what happens to me when I walk in the woods, and I'm kind of in a daydreaming mode. And that is actually part of what I enjoy in walking around in the woods, is that it's kind of carrying me and holding me in a way that I can be in somewhat of a daydreaming mode. Very, very different. So much of our life, we feel like we have that kind of protection, that we don't need to be engaged. So what we need to do is to artificially create engagement. And that's where the active pause comes in. Again, in focusing and in any form of mindfulness. If you don't break the routine, basically your mind functions in saying, hey, if you don't need to pay attention, you don't. And it's good. It's a great design. You know, you don't want to use energy to something that's not useful. So yeah, we're well designed, you know, through evolution to not waste energy paying attention when we don't need to. Okay. So that part, you know, is that we need to stimulate attention. The other point that's interesting is, more often than not, we need to stimulate unfocused attention, because we function much of the time in focused attention. And so we need to shift from focused to unfocused. Now, you know, it was very clear when I mentioned the pigeon, or when I mentioned people who are picking berries in the wild. But just to look in a more contemporary notion of what it entails, just think about how we feel kind of weird if we're not doing something. So how much we need to pick up our phone and fidget with it, look at the news, look at Facebook, look at email, look at text, look at photo, okay? So there is a sense we're in a mode where we're so much into focused attention that focused attention has no place to go, and we're like trying to grasp at anything where we can rest our focused attention on. So imagine something, I'm using my hand in a grabbing mode. And so your whole organism is oriented into wanting to grab. And so what is it that it can grab? It needs to grab something. And so it's going to grab the phone to look at something, okay? And so from that place, we're kind of addicted to that, but it's an addiction to, there's that mode needs to find something to grab. And the answer is not to keep finding more things to grab, but to step out of the focused attention mode to an unfocused mode, which is different from not paying attention. It's paying a different kind of attention. It's kind of reorganizing our system for that. Okay? So, and if you think about it, that is a lot of burnout, is about having to be constantly in that watchful, focused attention mode. So this is called, the series is Help for Helpers. And, a lot of us in being helpers are functioning with a sense of it's really vitally important that we be present for the people we help. And so that sense of, duty and the consequences of us not being present are hard. And so there is that tension. And the antidote to that is to cultivate more of that unfocused attention. So, of course, in moments of rest, of course, doing other activities, but also to be able, moment by moment, even when we're in the middle of being important, being needed, and being focused, to have the capacity to shift moment by moment from focused into unfocused. Okay? Because focused attention is something that is meant to function for relatively short bursts of time. Otherwise, it is draining to the system. And so if you go back to the image of hunter-gatherers, contemporary hunter-gatherers or our ancestors, they were not, like neurotic. So, oh my God, I gotta find the next berry. There's a kind of a relaxed attention with the capacity to also shift into, looking more carefully and more focused way, but essentially a background of unfocused attention. Okay. And so to close this within the context of focusing, what I find very interesting is that focusing is not just something that happens when I focus with somebody and I explore a certain felt sense or a certain difficult issue. But focusing is also what happens over time. So over time, when I have a regular practice of focusing, it is a way in which I am able to cultivate my ability to shift from unfocused to focused, and from focused to unfocused. And so, in a sense, it is a mindfulness training. If you don't just think of focusing as some kind of a technique to have you have insights, it is essentially a philosophy of life as interaction. And I think that, the reason that I find very beautiful to study Lynn is to see how much of his insights were deeply grounded in an embodied and gut level understanding of life as interaction. And that, then scientific findings from the perspective of psychology, from the perspective of evolutionary psychology, from the perspective of how animals function, from, paying attention to threat, paying attention to trauma-informed, therapy. The reason they're consistent is because essentially that there was this grasp on reality as interaction. And so what now neuroscience and evolution tell us is give us a little bit more detail as to the why and how. And so knowing that helps our practice. That's kind of a loop, which is what we're not just talking about it to say, oh, how nice is it that, by the way, it's like, yeah, there's this consistency between what, say, Lynn said and what Ian Mcgilchrist is saying, but to say, in what way is this going to help me, say, do my focusing better, do my meditation better, and in what way is this going to help me, with my life, with a different understanding of who I am, how I fit, and how I function in interaction. And so this is what we're going to practice a little bit in the experiential, in the breakout rooms.
Great. Thank you, Serge. And we want to give people a moment to pause, to just take in what you've offered us and to see what's there for each of us, and invite anyone to respond in any way, whatever is there for them. I think I may start by saying that what you were talking about reminded me of one of my favorite people, Brother David Steindl-Rast, who I often quote, who says that mindful living is like when you're a kid and you learn to cross the street, that you learn to stop and then really look both ways, always, and then go. And that seems very similar to your three movements.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anybody else?
Lynn, I'm wondering about something. I'm stuck on the pigeon. Stuck on the pigeon pecking grain. I love the image of, whoops, my computer. Okay, my computer was telling me it was about to die. Okay, so there, I was focused on what I was going to say. All of a sudden, my scanning attention picked up this danger. My computer was about to die. And I just love the image of the pigeon needing to, at the same time, some other part of them, or maybe, I don't know if anybody's studied the attention of pigeons, like do they shift from picking grain to scanning the skies every so often or whatever? But it was really, it was a powerful metaphor in terms of making a distinction between these two kinds of attention. And I wonder if there may not be a third, because it seems to me that non-focused attention that is scanning for danger is slightly different than non-focused attention that is in a very safe container. And so that was one place I was wondering. And then there's something that connects to it, but I'm not quite sure how it connects yet, which was another place in your talk, Serge. You were talking about, people grabbing their phones as an example of how uncomfortable we are with unfocused attention. And so I was just kind of playing around with some thoughts about, so this addiction to focused attention, I'm wondering to what extent it's a way of dealing with trauma, because it seems to me that whenever we have unfocused attention in a safe space, there's a tendency for old trauma that wants to complete itself to come up, but we may not be ready to deal with it. So maybe it's a way of avoiding dealing with, with these stopped processes that are actually always trying to restart. Thank you.
Yes, and yes, and yes. And what you're saying is something that I could spend hours depending on. So to address it, I'm going to give a very, very, very incomplete notion. But so your first comment was about this thing, is this happening serially or at the same time? So essentially, these are two circuits of the brain, and they function at the same time. It's not, say, 1 minute one and then 1 minute the other, so that you can be fully, the pigeon is, you can be fully focused on the grain. You're not, one moment, if you were just filming the pecking, you wouldn't see a flicker of something happening unless the peripheral attention is solicited. The second point you make is, isn't there a difference between that unfocused attention, the danger, and when there is a sense of safety? So in the Porges, polyvagal theory, where it comes under is the concept of neuroception, which is essentially the body's ability to scan its environment for clues to possible danger and safety. So the function itself is the same. But then what the organism does with it is in safety mode, it engages, that function is done within the ventral vagal mode, which is mindful engagement, social engagement. But in a situation where there is danger, it's done within a parasympathetic mode, which is more activation to survive. So the function itself is there, but in these different modes, we engage with it differently, and we experience it differently. And so, this, of course, then gives a nice transition to your other question about how related it is to trauma. That one of the characteristics of trauma is the tendency to be in hyperactivation, and not being, the war is not over. So so we're more in sympathetic mode. So obviously being in sympathetic mode means being more watchful and vigilant for the possibility of danger. And so that gives you more of that focused attention, because it's going to grab something. And there is at the same time, the kind of anesthesia that's a dorsal vagal, which is danger is overwhelming. If you start thinking about all the possible danger of life, oh my God, it's too much, overload and collapse. And so in the polyvagal theory, when, first the survival parasympathetic is engaged, but when it's too much for the parasympathetic to actually deal with, it falls into dorsal vagal. And so dorsal vagal is kind of a numbness. Okay. And so essentially, with the sense of trauma and the world is such a dangerous place that we can't deal with it, we are in a state of numbness. And so don't notice stuff. And as a result, when something comes up, it's not just, oh, here's something. Oh my God, there's something. And so you go from numbness to activation and numbness and activation. And this, which is what happens under addiction and trauma. And from that place, it's hard to find the mindful, ventral engagement. But that's where it goes from numbness to grabbing.
Serge, it's Pauline Dolan. I'm sure there's lots of, well, there's actually 25 little squares, so I don't know if you can see me.
I know, I see you.
Oh, good. So I think in the telling, there's certainly magic in the hearing what you said, because as you were talking, I was just writing down a memory of, and I liked the way I was framing it, was the mother in me that had lost the child couldn't actually deal with her grief until I was strong enough to be present to her, and that was maybe 12 or 15 years afterwards. And she was very angry. Naturally, she was very angry with us all, with the world, because no one had fought to save her baby. I didn't know that she was so angry. I did everything I could do to resolve her grief, but I had to wait until she felt safe enough to, I suppose, come forward. Yeah, to come forward. So you're in the telling of it, I remembered that, and I really loved that. So thank you very much for this morning's gift. Thank you.
Yeah. The grieved part, the angry part, the hurt part could not be present.
No.
Until it was safer for her to be present. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So thank you for that healing.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Something else comes up for me. You were talking about the numbness, but I'm wondering, because of my own experience, does it have to be numbness, or can it just be a not knowing how to be with? I mean, it's not exactly the same as numbness. Numbness, anyway, it doesn't feel the same to me. So there's numbness and simply a not knowing how to be with something, so it just kind of sits there without having attention paid to it or being dealt with.
So yeah, if we use just the words, there's a similarity between both, and it feels like, blurred. But if you pay attention to the experience and the quality of that experience, the numbness will have the quality of being in a fog, or swimming through jam, or through jelly, or through that kind of, it's all foggy. The movements don't have so really that disempowerment. Okay, the sitting with not knowing, which can happen in a more ventral place, so the more engagement. It can be, I don't know, but there's a quality of, and it's okay. And it maybe is that mixture of, could have some degree of anxiety, some degree of fear, but also some degree of excitement. I don't know. And, it's a challenge, but it's not an existential question. So that's why, though, it's very important on the three stages, and I don't want to go too much into the polyvagal theory, but essentially that the three, the polyvagal theory is about there's three ways, in which we are human beings that correspond to the circuits that are activated. And each of the circuit is a totally different way of engaging with the world. So if you just describe some actions in some way, they could be similar. but they're lived in a very different way from each part, because there's a part where basically the survival is not at stake. It could be challenging, but it's going to basically be okay. And then there's a place that's about survival. And then there's a place with a complete overwhelm, you know. And so then you're going to live life differently from each of these places.
I'm wondering about what I have an image of a pigeon in a cage pecking away, and a pigeon out on a busy sidewalk, and how the pigeon in the cage, would it be less likely to have that ability to scan? And what I'm putting it together with is COVID and how we've kind of hunkered down in our cages and need somehow to get out and develop more of that ability to have the scanning of danger or something else happening around us. That's what came from.
Yeah. It's a beautiful image. I love that image. I don't know about the pigeon, but I would venture to say that the instinct to keep monitoring would still be there, and they, you know, but in terms of us and COVID, I think we don't even need to go all the way to COVID. We could just go in general in terms of what civilization has done to us, is in some ways reduced our need to pay attention so that that ability is less developed. On the other hand, increased our need to pay attention in a more focused way, which then, you know, conflicts with the unfocused, created traumas, you know, like the concept of Freud, civilization and discontent. You can put it in terms of civilization and its trauma and its overwhelm. And so then essentially we've gone more into paying less attention, but also being more scared and overwhelmed, and then being in numbness, you know. So then what happened with COVID is a subset of that. It's part of the accidents. But, you know, the COVID does not happen by itself. It's in addition, it's an experience that comes affecting us as we have been affected by millennia of civilization. So it then adds to that, you know, lesser ability to be unfocused and the accumulated trauma.
Okay, so what do you want to share from your breakout rooms? We're eager to hear it.
This is Shashi. My question is mindfulness ever without me in it?
Without what in it?
Without me in it.
Me.
Well, maybe we need a moment to, that's like a very deep mindfulness question, isn't it? Right? What is the me? Is there ever a mindfulness without me in it? Zashi, is it okay if we just allow that question to be here and then see what comes for other people, since we have only a few minutes? Or did you want Serge to actually answer his?
My preference would be, I mean, I love the question, I like to answer, but I would suggest we hear other people and then have a very brief, because this is an amazing, nice topic, but the purpose is to have other people speak up as well.
And we'll come back to the last minute or so. We want to hear from as many of you as we can.
Sashi, the only thing I can say is me is a concept. Me is a concept. Awareness is a constant. So awareness exists but the concept of me is acquired.
Thank you, Bob. Anybody else?
Well, for me, it feels like the me is always there because it's the me. I mean, I spend a lot of time looking out a certain window at the trees in the neighboring yard, but it's a me who's looking. I mean, it always feels like it's a me who's looking and feeling and registering. So
it feels like a me that's looking. Anybody else?
I just want to say that I really enjoyed our breakout group. And so just wanting to thank you, Lynn, for the opportunity to connect more in depth with people. And I'm not quite sure how it happened. I think at the beginning, we were each talking about our attention and how it can get pulled to our phone and things like that. And then over time, I felt like we just kind of slipped into a space of just feeling the presence of being there with each other. And it was just very sweet. So thank you. And thank you to
that presence of being there with each other.
I'll say something about it was really nice being in a small group, and the conversation. I so appreciated that pinpoint focusing and looking at our phones or doing something else, and the ability to notice how much we need to do that. And even when it's not an external connection to the phone, or I don't know, we go inward to our neurosis. Like, I was mentioning to BJ and Manka that, sometimes it's pinpoint focusing on, oh, I didn't say that right, or I should have not spoken this way or that. And that's still a focusing, like this pigeon pinpointed focusing. Whereas I found the other open, wider focus to be very spiritual and original to the way that human beings are born in the world, very like having this animal instinct. Like if you look at animals, right, other than pigeons or whatever, their ability to listen to something that is off, like a deer, if they sense some sort of sound, a leaf or something, to look in the direction to see what's there. And it's, I don't know, it feels very spiritual, like the ability intuitively to sense either danger or safety. And it's both an inner, like it's deep inside of us, this ability to notice, right? But it's also outside of us. It doesn't really have like a pinpointed place.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It's spiritual. I think anyway, that's how I felt, and I really appreciated that.
Thank you so much.
I was also interested in the recognition of how trauma affects attention so greatly. And when it's untreated, the trauma has such control over the attention that goes on in daily life. Whereas when it's being treated, more attention can be focused on the now. And then as it becomes more treated, but it's still there. And then as it's more treated, somebody is much better able to live their life without constantly being affected by it. They have still knowledge of it, but it doesn't affect them in the same way. So I thought that was very, very interesting too, to just look at it in this different way.
Yes, thank you.
Hi, it's Steph. Can you hear me?
Yes, Steph.
Oh, thank you. My internet's very slow. in the breakout room with Vivian, we were dancing between the two, the focused and the unfocused attention, and really exploring it. And as we were exploring it, I felt this joy arise, and we both just started laughing. And I felt like that was that authentic place beyond. And it was just such a joyful moment. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
That's lovely.
Mm-hmm. So maybe I can briefly address the question about the me. So, the question of is there room for me? What is me? What is that experience? So many people have addressed it in so many different ways that there's no way to come up. I'm not pretending to come up with a definite answer, but what I'm offering is an answer that's from the perspective of what I describe. Okay, so as any answer, it's partial. It's a facet of it. If you look at the idea of mindfulness as a disruption and an orienting, then essentially what you're saying is that this process is about finding me. It's like the GPS. With the disruption and the orienting, it's not orienting in general, it's orienting me. So the me is central. Okay. Now, very interesting. I want to describe what is the me, having done that. What is me? Is that like a little person inside, and it's nice. Two of the people who answered, Isabel was talking about the way in which the notion of inside and outside blurs, and the two merge kind of in a way. What is inside? What is outside? And there was also this other comment about the dancing between the being in the focused mode and the unfocused mode. So this is about being in the process. And being in the process, from this perspective, give rise to the experience of a me. Okay, so I'm not trying to describe me in some kind of abstract way, but simply describing that engaging in the process of mindfulness, as I described it, is a process of finding me, and of what we find is an experience. And that experience is not a thing, is not an object, is not, some kind of a quantity, but an experience that can be described as some kind of a dancing between aspects, dancing between inside, outside, dancing between a certain sense of attention in a focused way or unfocused way. And so that's kind of how I would address it.
Thank you, Serge. Well, I think it's just about time to stop. And I just want to say that Dorothy is at the week-long, and Katerina, and maybe a couple of other people from our community here. So we don't have a poem to end with. So Serge, maybe you would want to end with just a kind of something for us to think about as we go into our day.
So maybe just an invitation to pause and find whatever comes up spontaneously for each of us, be it some words, some image, some physical sense, some felt sense, but allowing whatever it is that comes up and welcome it.
Thank you.
I have a poem here that Bob had found that was rather touching to each of us, from Ralph Waldo Emerson. It just happens to be sitting on my desk.
Thank you.
Shall I try reading it?
Sure.
It's from Emerson, and it says, "To laugh often and much, to win the respect of intelligent people and the affection of children, to earn the appreciation of honest critics and endure the betrayal of false friends, to appreciate beauty, to find the best in others, to leave the world a bit better, whether by a healthy child, a garden patch, or redeemed social condition, to know even one life has breathed easier because you have lived. This is to have succeeded.
Thank you so much.